Yeah, it is. It's Forge.
The one and only.
All right, let's I want to load this up here real quick and watch this. So this is the upcoming it's the next game from the guys who did No Man's Sky, I believe. And I've seen a lot of people like talking about this game. I previously didn't have any interest in it because I really didn't enjoy No Man's Sky. However, after how much fun I've been having um, in Shrouded right now, I decided to take a closer look at this. And Forge has some entertaining views sometimes. He's got another video on Quinfall I want to cover, which we might get to this today while we're sitting here. But I definitely want to take a look at this one for Light No Fire because I haven't looked at it too much, so I'd love to hear his thoughts on it. So let's maximize this, make sure that this is open, and go
Only
ahead.
Sean Murray is back once again. He's got big plans for his next game, and you know what? He can't wait to tell you all about them. If you happen to miss the news at the Game Awards this year, Hello Games revealed their latest project, a new, highly ambitious, surprise, surprise, open-world fantasy multiplayer survival game that goes by the name Light No Fire. Now, officially, what they say about the game is Light No Fire is a game about adventure, building, survival, and exploration.
Let me read that. Set on a fantasy planet the size of Earth. Oh, that was the thing they were touting when the trailer first came out. It's like it's gonna be Earth-sized.
Together, set on a fantasy planet the size of Earth, it brings the depth of a role-playing game to the freedom of a survival sandbox. Now, when revealing Light No Fire, here is what Sean Murray, otherwise known as Mr. Undersell and Overdeliver, had to say about the game.
What people don't know is that for the last 5 years, we've been working on something new.
Another game.
Yeah, something very different, something maybe more ambitious, you know, for...
You don't want to say the... Hang on. Yeah, here we go.
I actually love that Keeley couldn't help but just laugh about that. I mean, what else are you going to do, right? After the debacle that was No Man's Sky.
Yeah, that's awesome.
When Sean Murray comes on stage and he says he's making a more ambitious game than the last one.
Tell us a bit about it, Sean.
For No Man's Sky, we generated a whole universe of kind of sparse, alien-looking planets. For our new game, we wanted to create an Earth, a planet that is as varied as a universe. Something with, you know, mountains, real mountains, not video game mountains.
Like what exact? Of course, I mean, they're still video game mountains, but I get what I get what he's saying here because he extrapolates.
Mountains that are miles high, taller than Everest. That when you climb to the top of them and look out, you can see rivers and canyons and continents. You know, you can see oceans.
So it's just like an open world planet kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean the first real open world, right?
All right, I hate it when people use terminology. It's like the first real version. I mean, I feel like we've done open world. I mean, technically, Lord of the Rings Online is open world. World of Warcraft is technically open world. Like, there's no loading screens. There's no zones. You know.
Oh my god, dude, he can't help himself. I'm convinced at this point that he can't help himself in calling their next game the first real open world game. I understand what he's getting at though, because he's saying that they're actually crafting a whole planet and like it will be the first.
Just realized I still had
World
of Warcraft still
true.
open
Have there not been
behind.
fully realized planets. I mean, there's like No
Here, I'll
Man's Sky
turn
is
that off.
full of fully realized planets. Starfield wasn't, but that's another story.
Something without boundaries. And we're going to let everyone play in it together. You know, a place where people can live out their sort of adventures together.
So look, I know what we're all immediately thinking, right? Here he is, Sean Murray back on stage, really drumming up hype about his game, saying it's like, well, there's actually a few interesting things that came out of this, a few things that I really want to highlight on here. So first of all, he says that the game is more ambitious than No Man's Sky, which is, of course, interesting given the fact that this will be focusing on one single planet rather than an entire universe full of planets. But while No Man's Sky is certainly a big game, there's no question about that, it's also in a lot of ways shallow with a lot of repetitive, just a lot of repetitiveness to it, to the planets, to the things on the planets, to the biomes on the planets. It's been fleshed out over the years, but definitely if I were to
You know, I didn't like No Man's Sky for a lot of different reasons, but mostly because it was lacking any sort of like, at least the times I tried it, you know, it was, you know, you die a lot, and I don't like to die in video games. It's like, um, hang on, who's a fantasist? Are you talking about the guy from No Man's Sky, Babylonia? Um, yeah. He. I think there's something to be said for frontmen who don't know how to keep their. They hype things up too much, and they may not mean to do it on purpose. It may just be their nature. Um, but it's like they're constantly hyping things up, and as opposed to just being realistic about things. I didn't get into No Man's Sky when it launched. I did try it last year. I think it was early last year when I tried it. And I did give it a shot. Like I gave it a good shot, but I couldn't get past like there was nothing to do. Like it was like there was no storyline. There was just like here's a big planet that's procedurally generated, survive. Oh, and by the way, there's this space station you might want to go to because you know, there's like kiosks that you can get missions from. Only the missions aren't like story missions. They were like I don't know. It's the same reason I couldn't get into Elite Dangerous. Like I need there to be a narrative. One of the only reasons I'm enjoying Enshrouded right now is because of the fact that it has underneath it, um, kind of like the way they did A New World, where you're discovering the story through the journal pages as you go along. So it's like all this stuff has sort of already happened. I guess you're doing that in Grounded as well. You're sort of uncovering clues about your environment through these journal entries, which leads to a narrative experience that draws you down the road. Whereas opposed to, I never got that with No Man's Sky. So if I'm going to enjoy Light No Fire, it would need to have a narrative element. And if it's just going to be more of the same, I probably won't be excited about it. It looks visually, it looks breathtaking.
Dense the No Man's Sky experience, I would say, very, very wide and shallow versus very narrow and deep, or any other combination in between. So I presume when he says that Light No Fire is more ambitious than No Man's Sky, he's probably referring to a bigger focus on detail and depth within that single planet. In fact, his next claim is that the game is Earth-sized, bigger than Earth. In fact, an entire planet that will be as varied as a universe with mile-high mountains that from the top you could see rivers, canyons, oceans, and continents. Again, really selling pretty hard here. And then, you know, there's that quote, you can't ignore it, when he says this is the first real open world. Like, again,
Yeah.
he can't help himself. That has to be the case. It's got to be compulsive, really. Something without boundaries is interesting to me because that obviously points to the idea that this whole planet will have no loading screens to it.
So I mean, this looks visually, it's definitely a stylized, you know, it's you can definitely tell it's the same engine that they used for No Man's Sky, even though it's a different art style. I think the art style looks great. The question is just going to be whether or not it has a story to it.
While you're exploring. And then also that one line where he states that we're going to let everyone play in it together. It kind of alludes to the idea that this is one single shared world. You know, it may very likely, almost certainly will have some sort of phasing, but the idea that we're all on this one planet exploring together. And I do believe, sort of like No Man's Sky, they also are going to have this discovery element to the game where when you find things, you can name them, and then that mountaintop, that river, that whatever things will be nameable for everyone who comes across it.
That doesn't make any sense though. Like, shouldn't it be only the first people who discover something is nameable? Like, it makes no sense if everybody can name that thing. Like, that makes zero sense to me.
Whoever conquered it for the very first time. So what do we know about the game besides this initial introduction? Well, taking a look at the Steam page sheds a bit more light on exactly what we can expect. The list of features include, this is a multiplayer Earth, as mentioned. We will meet players from around the globe, build a life, explore, and survive together, constructing persistent buildings and communities. That is really interesting. If this is one shared world, and these are persistent buildings, the idea is if I build a base at the foot of a mountain, and you eventually come across that mountain yourself, you would see the same base that I built. That's a cool idea. The game
That's never going to work though. If someone has built, you think about this for a minute. If they're talking about a shared space where, even if there's phasing involved, if I build my version and you build a version and he builds a version and she builds a version, you're going to have all these versions of buildings built in or around the same place. So that doesn't make any sense what he was just saying. There's no way that they're going to have a persistent system that allows, like, if this, how can I say this in a way that makes sense? If you have a million players playing and building something in the same space, which version am I going to see when I log into the game? Am I going to see the version where I've built things, or am I going to show the version of you building things? Um, because I'm not sure how that works. Bubbly says it's the hallmark of the genre. Conan Exiles did it with the unnamed city, the Lemurians, serpent walls and old ruins that told stories, as well as monster design and environmental storytelling. It has as much more story as many RPGs, but it's told differently. Huh. So I never got deep enough into Conan Exiles to see that aspect of it. Um, but in terms of the tech they're talking about here, I don't know how they would make that work. Like, there's got to be a prime version that's like, this is the version that's going to show up in all the different phases of the game um, for different people. So, yeah, that doesn't quite make sense.
Game was procedurally constructed, which of course it is when you're talking about things of a scale like this, of actually building something with the surface area of the Earth or larger. Procedural generation is going to be involved in that. They say it is a truly open world with no boundaries at a scale never attempted before, a massively varied and dense planet filled with immersive biomes, unique elements, and valuable resources. It's also fantasy, whereas No Man's Sky was sci-fi. Light No Fire is fantasy slanted. It's going to present us with this ancient Earth to uncover, one where we are not the hero. Love
Got
to hear
bunny
that.
characters.
Just make me a regular old humdrum guy who's got to go through various challenges. That's part
Why
of what
Enshrouded
makes
looks
the
interesting.
experience really
Story-wise, why
enjoyable.
I'm
They've also
helpful.
mentioned that the
Funcom
game
won't
will
ruin
be
Dune.
thick
I
with
think they're
lore,
going to do fine with
mystery, and
Dune.
a constant fight for survival. I would say one of the most obvious things that are lacking in No Man's Sky, again, with the caveat that they have added stuff over the years, but even with those additions, I would consider No Man's Sky very light on the narrative elements.
It's
it is more
extremely
like
light
a
in the
space
narrative element.
exploration sandbox, like gathering resources, using that to craft things, whether it be bases or your items, the components of your ship, your weapons, all that stuff. It's like an exploration, gathering, crafting game with like survival elements and even full-on survival game modes. But it seems like with this game, they're going to have more of an emphasis on lore and storytelling. And then the last bullet point on the Steam page is mentioning that this is an unexplored Earth. And this really leans into the idea that there's a possibility that they go with some sort of a claiming and naming system. As players explore the planet, that there will be an element of, hey, if you do a certain thing, you can actually name it. So if you climb to the top of the mountain, if you're the first person to do that, you can name that mountain. And I'm assuming there's going to be some constraints so that this doesn't get too out of hand. But yeah, they say every mountain can be climbed, and below them lie endless vistas, oceans and continents perhaps no others have seen. Who will climb to the tallest mountains? Who will find the deepest sea? Now, beyond this description, we of course have the announcement trailer. It was roughly 2 minutes in total. And while
So the idea of people naming things, what's up, Shokadas? That goes back to like EverQuest 2. I can remember in EverQuest 2, like the first people to find things, you could name it on your server. And then there used to be a ding. So when you got a world first on something, um, whether it was a piece of loot or a boss mob or something, it would do this like worldwide announcement for certain things and then zone announcements for other things. Um, Vanguard did that as well. So I mean, I get it, but it has to be in moderation. Like, can't be the first person for every phase. It has to just be one person for each thing. Like, that's it. Because he had mentioned earlier about the idea of having it to be where all these people could come and put their mark on it. It's like, no, it's got to be one per server. Hang on, why did this? Sometimes my space bar
all
doesn't
brief,
work.
it did give and show off quite a few systems, mechanics, and features that got revealed here. It appears like there will be full-on survival systems. We see a few examples of players gathering resources and even doing full-on base building at one point. We see a player what appears to be doing the construction of a wall.
So the wall that construction does look cool, where it's like sort of crumbling into place. That's kind of an interesting way to present the animation of something being built, because normally most games you get the grayed out version, and then it's either red or green depending on if it's in the right spot, and then once it goes green, you click, and then it's just instantly in place. Whereas this appears to have like an animation to it. That's kind of cool.
For a building that they're working on. We also very, very briefly, they were super short clips, but we did see combat. We saw both melee and ranged action combat. They were super brief, but I really hope, if anything, I hope this is a big focus over No Man's Sky, is that they try to make a good feeling combat system, because No Man's Sky's multi-tool combat never felt particularly amazing. It was serviceable, but certainly wasn't a main draw for the game.
I hated the combat in No Man's Sky, and also, by the way, when they do the combat, I love the combat in Enshrouded. It's lock on, so once you're locked, your abilities your ranged abilities automatically go to the target, whether it's the wand or the arrows, right? Or your fireballs and other things. As long as you're locked on, it's instant homing to the target, right? There is a manual aim feature that you can use. I would never in a million years use the manual aim feature. I need lock on. The manual aim in those types of games, I absolutely suck at. I hate. And if it's going to be a good system for me personally, I need there to be a combat lock, so that when I'm doing range, I don't have to try to track targets with my bow, and that shit drives me nuts immediately. So hopefully we'll see. It would be nice to have both systems. If we could get both systems, it would be cool. But I don't know. And yeah, No Man's Sky combat was terrible, Babylonia. My biggest problem, Bubba says, my biggest problem with combat in No Man's Sky was it was impossible to enter a flow state. Yeah, it just felt weird. Like it just didn't feel good.
I hope combat gets much more of an emphasis here in Light No Fire. Also, it seems like magic would be likely given the game's fantasy setting, and we have seen characters with staffs in the footage. Besides the obvious showcase of the flying mounts, other forms of transportation displayed here were gliders, land mounts, and even boats. It's also clear that, yes, there's going to be a lot of different biomes. We saw a few of those.
Technically, all it did was show boats. It didn't show players driving boats. So
in this footage, including the very tall mountains that Sean was happy to mention, and they do appear like they are very tall mountains that you can climb. There were some clips with underwater gameplay. We saw characters swimming. We also saw several playable races. Besides humans, there looks to be a wide variety of animals that you can play as. These include things like rabbits, foxes, bears, frogs, many, many more. We saw a few different types of enemies, including skeletons, and there was a clip of that one massive crab. And also, we see what looked to be party sizes of at least 4. We saw as many as 10 characters in frame at a single time, specifically that scene where a group walks into that temple.
I bet it's going to be the same as most, where it's like 16 people to a server. Bubblina says, "You see that mountain? You can climb it." Todd Howard.
Looking thing, and we know that potentially they could support at least like somewhere around 32 players. That
32.
is at least the multiplayer cap in No Man's Sky.
So
But
if they're
then
doing
also,
if they're doing 32 in No Man's Sky,
expand far beyond that.
they're
and
probably
go to
doing the
larger
same
scale,
here.
beyond what was in the Steam description, and then what Sean said in that initial interview. We saw a news post where they said this thing specifically: as kids, we always loved the maps at the start of great fantasy books: Earthsea, Narnia, Middle Earth, and Westeros, whole worlds. Well, this is
where I got to stop, because way too many people will love to read things into this, especially this last sentence. A single planet we're going to let everyone play on together to explore an adventure. Most people are going to take that at face value and say, he said everyone. He said everyone together. That means everyone's going to be playing at the same time in the same place. Massively multiplayer MMORPG. Nowhere does it state that it's a single server. And nowhere does it state that it's a mega server like Elder Scrolls Online or World of, but even if it is like Elder Scrolls Online or say World of Warcraft or something, you could guarantee there will be phasing, which means that no, not everyone is going to be playing together at the same time on the same planet. You're either going to be in different layers, you're going to be in different phases, or they're going to have private servers where you can spin it up and have 32 whatever players. This does not mean that it's going to be a massive open MMORPG, but many people are going to read into that.
Our fantasy planet, a single planet we are going to let everyone play on together to explore and adventure. If not explicitly, that definitely hints at the idea that yes, we're all going to be sharing this one space. There would most certainly be phasing. I would have to assume that they're phasing.
I probably need to watch more of Forge. I haven't ever actually watched a lot of his videos before, but I got turned on him recently. He seems to, his head seems to be in a similar place to mine, because I may have jumped the gun a little bit because I'm saying the things that he was already going to say anyway.
And we can't gather 10,000 people on top of the same mountain. I'm not assuming that is going to be the case. They will be doing some, there'll be many, many, many servers, and then they will group you with players and have them come into and out of existence. Or when you group over the players and actually have a physical group formed, you'll all stick together in the same instance. That's what I'm presuming is going to happen here. But the play space, the idea here is that the play space will be the same for everyone. So again, we keep saying it, but if I discover and name a mountain, if you come across that same mountain, you would see it with the name that I gave it. So that is a really cool idea and premise.
So he said it differently here, which makes more sense that way. That's the way I was thinking it was. Maybe I misunderstood what he was talking about earlier on the video where he was suggesting. I just probably misunderstood him. I thought he was suggesting earlier in the video that here, if this is the mountaintop, everybody who comes here gets to name it, and then there's versions of, like, how do you see who named what first? Like, but this is where he's talking about just the first person there named it, and everyone sees it after that. That's what I'm assuming.
Now, in the
But
interview,
when it says
again,
you
we
need a
also
hype
noticed
translator
that
for
Sean
anything by
said that
Sean
they had
Murray
been
or
working on this
Todd.
project for 5 years. Now, I found a thread on the game's subreddit where someone actually went back to look for various times that Sean Murray had mentioned the game's development over the course of this past 5 years. So here's a rough overview of that timeline. We know that in March 2017, Hello Games announced Hello Labs, which they were calling an initiative
Funding and support for 1 or 2 projects, one already in development, procedural generation or experimental focus, more details to follow.
to develop projects focused on procedural world generation and experimental games research, and this is very likely where the initial concept for Light No Fire started coming together. Now, according to Sean's 5 years of development statement, around sometime in or around 2018 is likely when Light No Fire began its development. We know in April 2019, speaking with Games Radar, we got the first official mention of this game, where Sean said, we're also starting on something new, which is big, ambitious, and silly, but we're still a very small team. We do quite a lot between us, but I think that's because we are all so into it. Later that year in July, Sean said they were actually initially planning on making a relatively small game, but plans shifted, and they instead decided to follow No Man's Sky with another, quote, crazy and ambitious game, which he said at the time of that interview was still in early incubation and prototype stages. Now, in September 2020, in an interview with IGN, Sean said that after what happened with
dragon
the launch
animations
of No
need
Man's
some
Sky,
work.
I'm sure we all remember, it was quite
good.
a bit of a mess. He didn't want to talk about their next big game too early, but he did reiterate that as a studio, they were definitely focused on doing something new, big, and ambitious once again. Then, in April 2022, speaking once more to IGN, Sean discussed how Light No Fire is a game that, like No Man's Sky, would almost seem impossible even with a 1,000-person studio. However, as we know, that studio is still quite small. Hello Games, last I heard official accounting of it, was still under 50 people total.
Yeah, but that's
because
they're using AI and procedural generation. You could do so much.
Procedural tech, using that
Yes,
to their
procedural
advantage,
tech,
and that is
yes.
definitely going to apply here in Light No Fire as it did in No Man's Sky. And then obviously, just last December, that is when we got the official reveal
Stargate.
of Light No Fire. So your next question might be, here in the news about this game and everything that we have covered thus far, when is it coming out? Well, there's no announced year even at the moment, which typically means it won't be happening in our current year, but that's not always the case. There are people who are speculating, with them showing so much varied gameplay in that initial announcement trailer, that it could be coming out sooner than expected, and Sean himself did say that he doesn't want to reveal and talk about this game too early, but I would be very surprised if we got a release in 2024, because on the Steam page, where usually
I don't think
if
it's
a game's
2024.
announcement is coming in the relatively near future, the release date will be listed as coming soon. They don't even have that. It's currently listed as to be announced. So I'm keeping my expectations in line with that time schedule for the time being. I'm going to assume at the earliest this game's releasing in 2025. They've also not even officially announced the platforms, if you can believe it. Like, obviously, yes, it's coming to PC because the Steam page exists, but they haven't announced what, if any, consoles it would be coming to. Now, obviously, they're not going to exclude consoles. I think it's just a question of what generations of consoles that
It'll
Light No
be
Fire is going to be
next
coming
gen,
to.
yeah.
So with all of this said, with all of this covered, yeah, I mean, I think Light No Fire looks pretty cool, but we certainly at the same time have every right to be skeptical, with Sean Murray once again stepping on stage making grandiose claims about one of his upcoming games.
true.
It's given me a serious case of deja vu, no question. Although I will say this time around, there are a few things that are different than the last time. For one, prior to releasing No Man's Sky, Hello Games was a very small studio who had only ever made pretty small games. But this time around, when they make a claim to have this massive, ambitious game in the works, well, now they have proof that they can do it. For as much of a mess as No Man's Sky was at release, and make no
They did
qualms
fix
about
it.
It was a total and complete mess. It totally underdelivered. It was the opposite of what I said earlier. They oversold and underdelivered. That is exactly what happened with No Man's Sky. But in the time since, they have a well-documented turnaround for the game. It is in a very good spot right now, and it got there, and this is probably the best thing of all, it got there via consistent 100% free updates. The game's gotten totally free updates over these past few years. If you bought the game at launch, you can play all of the updates that have come in 8 years of time without spending a single penny. No paid expansions, no paid DLC, nothing
It's
like
pretty
that.
impressive.
That's the right way to do it when you underdeliver on a game, but as we all know, and we've seen time and time again,
But
most
when it
studios,
says
most
letting players
developers
name
will
things in
not
the
do
multiplayer
that.
world
They'll
is
fix the game, but you'll pay them for it in the
bad. Full
process.
stop.
So it might have taken a while, but
It's
No
true.
Man's Sky has actually turned around, and it's now
There's gonna be
a
way too many
massive,
dick jokes.
certainly successful, and by all accounts beloved game at the moment. You take a look at recent Steam reviews and total Steam reviews, it's positive. It's very positive. So people enjoy this game, and from what I gather, the game has a fairly large portion of its player base on the consoles as well.
It
the
does,
Steam PC
yeah.
player base aside. And another thing I would say that's definitely working in Light No Fire's favor is that they are clearly building on the foundation of their last game. In fact, so much of the reveal trailer looked almost exactly like No Man's Sky to me. If you had told me it was a No Man's Sky community mod, I actually almost would have believed you. Especially things like that underwater clip. I mean, if shown with no context, I actually would have assumed this was No Man's Sky. But
It's the
also
same
even things
engine,
like
yeah.
the flying mount. Like, yes, it's a dragon and not a spaceship, but the way the dragon lifts off from being on the ground into landing position, and
That's what I said earlier. I said the dragons need some animation work because for me, I view this and I see the exact same thing. And all they've done is they've just put it's the same exact system. So remember that video we watched the other day where we were talking about the Riot game developer was talking about the process of reskinning games and how companies will reskin games and they'll take all the things that they did from their first game, take the things that they know can make work. They'll port those things over and then they'll just put new stuff and new skins and new character models and new things on top of it, but the rest of it stays the same. That's literally what they've done here. They've just reskinned it. So it's still No Man's Sky, but it's reskinned in a fantasy environment and they've obviously, taken the tech in some new and interesting directions. But this is the exact same thing as the ships taking off and landing. So all they've done is just put a different rigging on top of that and it works.
then momentarily pauses right before taking off into flight. That is like the exact range of motion that ships do when they take off in No Man's Sky. Like exactly the same. It's hilarious. But the point is, it's pretty obvious that a lot of the work that they've put into No Man's Sky over the past decade plus, that game launched 8 years ago, but it was in development prior to that, obviously. We have a decade plus of No Man's Sky, tech, learning, systems, features, mechanics, things under the hood. Clearly,
Welcome
much
to
of
YouTube,
that is
Jesse.
being utilized and taken
Although we're not
advantage
streaming on YouTube right
here
now.
in Light No Fire, and I think
Apparently
that
my
gives
alarms
Light
are
No
still going
Fire
off
and
for,
makes it much more likely to live up to whatever it is they're going to promise between now and the game's official release.
Turn
So
that
I
off.
definitely approach this with caution, obviously, but I do think the odds are way more in the favor of Light No Fire, and I think there's a very high chance that it performs better than No Man's Sky does. And specifically, I'm just talking about the game that they deliver at release to what they say it's going to be prior to release. I'm assuming those two
All right,
things are
I've
gonna be
already
way
liked
closer together than what they
the
were
video,
with No Man's
so
Sky. But we'll
for
have
those of
to,
you who
of
want
course,
to
see.
know
The hope
more,
this time around
obviously,
is that
you can go watch his full presentation on it. He's got other stuff on his channel too, but I thought that was fun to watch this morning. I wanted to put that into the fold. I think the biggest thing here is just what most people know for common sense, which is don't buy into hype. Like, just it's I know some people it's harder than it is for others, but if you can avoid hype and you can just be like, hey, it looks cool, I'll wait until it comes out. Because guys who have a track record for blowing things out of proportion and hyping things up, that's not going to stop. It's never going to stop. Like I said, it's just compulsion for him. He can't help himself.